After 5 eventful years of university, I am officially an adult. Today marks the first 6 months of my time as a full-time software engineer, and when I think back to how I got here, the first real-world step of my career, I can attribute almost all of that to my internships during my college years. Now it's recruiting season, so all I see on TikTok and Instagram are these types of videos. So my first video back in quite a long time, I want to share with you all my job search tips and tricks, all the highs and lows, essentially everything that I could give you, as if we were having one nice, candid coffee chat. My favorite creators are the ones that are comfortable enough to be fully transparent. This is all pretty public information, so I'm going to try my best to be transparent about my career with you guys. Throughout my entire undergrad degree, I was fortunate enough to have landed 5 internship experiences, 3 summer terms and 2 fall terms that I personally took time away from to pursue. Dell Technologies, a startup, Google, the same startup, and Coinbase. More on them later. Now, I cannot lie, the pursuit was not easy, but nowadays you can't really expect anything to be. My main takeaway from it all: you really have to just keep trying and hold out hope. Trust that you'll end up in the right place at the right time. Hello. I have not done this in a while. So originally in this video, I was going to talk about 2 different things. Firstly was going to be everything about the recruiting process. So I've applied to a ton of companies across several years, and I feel like I've picked up a lot, like tips on how to apply. I feel like I've picked up on what different types of companies look for compared to other types of companies. I have a lot of tips on the interview questions that you'll most likely face and how to kind of study up for those. And secondly, I want to talk about my experiences. I've had the opportunity to work at more established, traditional companies. I got to work at startups and other up-and-coming companies like Coinbase. And I feel like each one has offered a lot of unique experiences, like various takeaways, but also various like pros and cons to each. But today I was just typing my script and it just seemed like it was going on and on and on. So to not drag out this video that much, I'm solely going to be focusing on recruiting tips, everything I could kind of help you guys out with for that. And hopefully I'll put out a second video that goes through all of my experiences. If that's something you want to see, let me know. But yeah, that's something I just want to fill you guys in on. Let's continue. So first off, a bit on the recruiting timeline. Now, the number 1 tip I can give you guys is start early. This means making your resume, sending the dozens of applications, and especially if you're in CS, this is practicing leak code. Essentially, the earlier you start, the more time you have to space out everything that you actually want to do. When it comes to the internship search and job search as a whole, you really just have to keep in mind that you're no longer running on your own timeline, but it is completely on the company's. Now, I know how stressful it can be to send that first application out. You're telling yourself that you'd rather get your resume perfect or maybe focus on that midterm you have next week before going into it. But trust me, there's never actually a good time and you just gotta do it. Companies may have postings a few days or a week before you decide you're ready. So it really comes down to just widening your reach. Now, in terms of general timeline, in terms of when to apply for what, I do have some recommendations just based on personal experience. Now, for Canadian internships, you typically want to apply approximately 3 to 4 months before the actual season. So if you're applying for summer internships, which I'm sure most of you guys are, you'd want to be starting that in January, possibly even February, but that's when you want to start getting your hands dirty and sending everything out. For American internships, it's typically 8 months before that. So for summer internships, you're even looking at September, you're looking at October. In general, if a company puts out a posting, you typically want to get an application in within a week of that posting going out. Now, I'm sure this isn't the case for every company, but I find that a lot of companies will remove their postings after they get X amount of applicants. So you just want to make sure that you're actually getting your resume looked at and you have a fair shot. Obviously, there are things that could help you elevate your chances of actually getting that application through the door. And that kind of segues me to my next point: how to apply. Now, the cold, harsh truth is that cold applications just don't cut it nowadays. It's not an over-exaggeration to say that the market is overly saturated and hyper-competitive. So there has to be some way that you could elevate your application and make it stand out. Every company's postings, regardless of company size, is going to get thousands of applicants. Everyone's looking through LinkedIn jobs, everyone's looking through that GitHub repo. So you're going to have to stand out. And one of my most tried and tested methods for that is company referrals. Now, when it comes to company referrals, everyone operates in sort of a different way. Some people like to email recruiters, some people are LinkedIn warriors, a lot of people like going to company events and trying to form in-person relationships there. So I can't speak on every single method, and obviously there are multiple paths to success, but I can talk about what's worked for me in the past, and that really just boils down to utilizing LinkedIn. Whenever I come across a new posting or a company that I'm interested in working for, I'll instantly hop on LinkedIn and just find some people relevant working in that company. So this can be other software engineers who are working the position I want to work in, people who are also interning there, hiring managers, recruiters, and from then on, I'm sending them that LinkedIn connection request, but with a cold message attached to it. Here's an example of one of those cold messages on the screen, but the main point of focus here is I'm not really sending that message for the sole purpose of getting a referral, but to genuinely learn more about the company and about this person that I'm reaching out to, what their role within the company is. I think it's very valuable just to gauge people's personal experiences in the company. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to just ask them for a quick 15-minute call. It's something that's a lot more efficient for you instead of several back and forths that will span days or weeks. And also when you're thinking about it from the other person's point of view, it's probably the least disruptive to their own schedule because they can just hop on a call for 15 minutes with you and share you their insights. Now, the important thing to note here is that you should expect rejection or ghosting 99 out of 100% of the time. But at the end of the day, all you're hoping for is that 1 in 100 to actually respond to you. At this point, if you're able to establish dialogue or perhaps even hop in a coffee chat with them, if you're able to show that you're genuinely curious about what they're doing, perhaps you're asking tips for your career in general, all of that helps the other person know more about who you are and that you're just a genuine person. Now, at the end of the chat, that's when I'll slide in the question asking them if a referral is possible or if that's something that their company can accommodate. And by now, since they have a better sense of who you are, they'll likely help you if they can. If it's possible, that's perfect. But even if it's not possible, at least you've learned more about the job. Perhaps you got some career advice, and at the end of the day, you have one more connection in this big industry you're about to enter. Now, the next idea I want to get across is that different companies have different styles when conducting interviews. Everything I'm about to talk about is insights and advice that I've gotten from recruiters and hiring managers across various companies, so take it as you will. Firstly, for the larger tech companies like the FANGs of the world, they have a really strong focus on strong communication skills and also a willingness to learn. These companies are the ones that are getting all the applicants. So they're fairly confident that their applicants are decently smart and all their applicants know how to code. It's because of this that they instead focus on, number one, can you properly explain what you're doing as you do it? And number two, are you willing to take feedback? So how this translates to the interview, the interviewer looks at how much of a clear walkthrough you're able to give as you're writing your code. And number two, how willing you are to adapt to any suggestions that they give you midway through the interview. A lot of the times they'll give you a follow-up question or an extension to the problem. So that's when they start to look at how good you are at adapting to those scenarios. A few years ago when I was interning at Google, I was talking to a hiring manager and they told me that honestly, they weren't even looking at the quality of the code that much, but instead cared a lot about how you justified what you were writing instead. Relating back to everything I just talked about, here are some of my tips. Number one, practice verbalizing everything while you're coding. Essentially, you want to have all your thoughts, all your brainstorming out in the open and organized onto the notes section of your code before you actually type a single line of code. Not only does this help the interviewer understand a lot more of what you're thinking, it's actually going to help you so that you don't start a half-finished idea and kind of catch yourself halfway through, not knowing where to go. And number two, keep a very open mind to changing your approach halfway if they're coming from tips from the interviewer. Now, on the flip side, with startup companies, obviously they're looking at a lot of the similar things. Every company likes to find someone with strong communication skills, but just from my experience, it seems like startups focus on technical skills a lot more and also prioritize a willingness to learn as well. So my tips when it comes to interviewing and recruiting for startups is firstly, just to practice LeetCode like crazy. There are a lot of resources out there to help you, but some of my favorites that I've used throughout the years, firstly, the Blind 75 LeetCode questions list. Number 2, the NeetCode roadmap, and even some books. There's the famous one like How to Crack the Coding Interview and also Grokking Algorithms. Essentially anything you can get your hands on that could help you feel confident in your technical abilities. And once again, just show that you're willing to learn and will be easy to work with as an intern. I think a lot of interviewers focus on this because it gives them a really good glimpse of how you're going to behave once you get hired onto the team. They want someone who could soak everything in and adapt to challenges because trust me, work does not prepare you for anything that you're going to do on the job. And now for the last category of recruiting tips, let's talk about interview questions. The interview process for internships is honestly pretty standard across all companies. The types of interviews you'll get really just boil down to 2 or 3 types of interviews. Usually just starts with a basic phone screening. This is when the recruiter will hop on a phone call with you and just talk to you about the company's missions, their core values, ask you very basic questions. And essentially this phone screening is just to make sure you're, number 1, a real person, and number 2, like a good person. So it's not something to stress about too much, and it is usually pretty chill. Now the second interview is usually some form of a behavioral interview. This is an interview where you still aren't doing any technical work, there's no coding involved, but you hop into a longer meeting with either someone from the HR team or a hiring manager, perhaps another software engineer, and you're purely just talking about your resume, talking about experiences that you've had, and them just trying to pick your brain about how well you fit into the team culture. My main tip for these types of behavioral interviews is to really internalize this method called the START method. Now the START method comes in really handy regardless of what question that the interviewer will give you. They'll give you questions like, name a time that you faced struggle, perhaps in school or at a previous job, or perhaps they'll ask you about something interesting you learned about tech in the past year. Regardless of whatever theoretical question they give you, the START method is really handy just for formatting your answer. So the acronym boils down to this image on the side. So S stands for situation, where you first give some context on the environment that you're talking about. T stands for task. So here you'll describe the task or the problem that was given to you. A stands for action. After you're faced with this problem, what actions did you take to combat it? Essentially, just describe what you did during this whole process. After all of that comes R, which stands for result. Who was affected by your actions, hopefully in a positive manner, but essentially what was the end result of everything that happened. And usually people stop here. They kind of have this STAR method instead. But I personally think having this last T is really beneficial because the last T stands for takeaway. And this is where you can talk about what you've learned from this entire experience. I personally really like it because you're able to dive into how this specific story that you've just told has made you a better person, perhaps a better coder, or just a better team player. And it's something that I think is a pretty valuable response. After the phone screening, after the behavioral interview, you finally have the technical interview. This is something that is so unique to tech interviews. So something that took me quite a while to get used to. So technical interviews essentially boil down to 2 types of interviews. There could be variations or other types out there, but these are the most common ones that I've come across throughout my several years of recruiting. Firstly is the whiteboard interview. So this is your really standard LeetCode style question. You'll hop into a 1-hour interview with the recruiter, and over here they'll give you 1 or 2 unrelated coding questions. Usually it'll be done on some platform where the interviewer is able to see your code in real time. In this process, they'll ask you questions that focus on any concept, anything from dynamic programming to maybe breadth first search or depth first search, even linked lists, anything you can think of. So make sure you stay prepared. Now the second type of technical interview is object-oriented programming. Now this is something that caught me by surprise. It was a concept I learned in school, didn't really know that it would show up in an interview. But in these types of interviews, they'll ask you to design a sort of system, I want to say. For example, they'll tell you to create a class, create an object that will represent a refrigerator, and essentially justify why you're using specific data structures for specific objects. In this example, perhaps they'll also ask you to now define an object that will represent ingredients that will go inside the fridge. So now it'll be the same thing where you're trying to define data structures, giving reasoning for it. And after all the definition is done, they'll start to ask you to define methods or functions that utilize these classes and objects you just created. So an example of this might be to make a function that takes an ingredient out of a fridge or puts an ingredient into the fridge. Personally, I like these questions a lot more simply because they're a lot more flexible opposed to whiteboard questions where there are usually 1 or 2 or 3 correct answers. I feel like for these object-oriented questions, you can take it however you want. 9 out of 10 times, the interviewer is looking purely for your justification skills in this case. They're trying to see why you chose certain data structures or why you implement methods in a certain way. So my tip for these types of questions is really just to study up on the various data structures that you'll come across. You have heaps, you have queues, you have stacks. Like all of these seem like they're such niche concepts that you'll never use, but have a lot of benefits when it comes to making your own systems. And that wraps up all of my greatest tips that I have for you guys relating to recruiting. I feel like I've been talking for a long time. Alright, now I hope this video was helpful. I spent the past months really just adjusting to adult life. There's been so much going on. So I'm kind of trying to figure out where content fits into all of that. But it is something that genuinely makes me happy, so I'm going to try my best to keep doing it. Even right now, I'm working on this Japan vlog that is many months overdue. I actually edited this intro like 4 months ago. So let me know if you guys want any more advice style videos. I'm going to try to put out just different stuff now. And in the meantime, hopefully stay tuned for a nice comfy vlog style video. We're just trying to get better and put stuff out. So see you guys soon. Thank you for watching, and ciao.
That's 5 minutes? I think so.